Hey, all, Scott Horton here to tell you about this great new project, Listen and Think Audio at listenandthink.com. They've got 2 new audiobooks read by the deepest voice in libertarianism, the great historian Jeff Riggenbach. Our Last Hope, Rediscovering the Lost Path to Liberty by Michael Maharrey of the 10th Amendment Center is available now. And Beyond Democracy, co-authored by Frank Karsten of the Mises Institute Netherlands and journalist Carl Beckman, will be released this month. And they're only just getting started. So check out listenandthink.com. You may be able to get your first audiobook absolutely free. That's Listen and Think Audio at listenandthink.com. All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. I'm Scott Horton. This is my show, The Scott Horton Show. Again, in case you're interested, the Future Freedom Foundation has posted my speech that I gave. John Glazer and I gave a talk at the Future Freedom Foundation thing in D.C. on February the 15th, and they've posted the YouTube there. It's at the Future Freedom Channel's YouTube channel, and it's also on my website at scotthorton.org/speeches, and I've also posted links to it on Facebook and Twitter. So if you like me and you like speeches, then maybe you would want to watch that video, and maybe you'd like to retweet it or click the share button, show it to somebody else if you're so inclined. scotthorton.org/speeches, and it's mostly John. I come on about 2/3 of the way through it, something like that, due to my plane being very late. But anyway, so there you go. That's at scotthorton.org/speeches. Okay, so now next up on the show is our old friend Adam Morrow from Interpress Service. That's IPSnews.net. He's a reporter living in Cairo, Egypt. Welcome back to the show. How the hell are you?
Good, Scott. Thanks. How are you?
I'm doing good. I really appreciate you making some time for us this evening. I know it's pretty late over there already. You know, seeing how you're in the future and all of that. But so I was just hoping you could kind of give us an update on post-coup d'etat, reinstalled military dictatorship Egypt, now beginning of March 2014, how things look. Maybe first of all, I guess, what's the status of the old emergency laws that say that the military can kidnap and torture whoever they want? Is that still in effect, or is that back in effect, or how's that work?
I don't think I've kind of lost track. I don't think the emergency law is actually in effect, but that is essentially what the military authorities are doing. They're continuing their crackdown on Muslim Brotherhood elements, and basically anybody who's shown any sort of opposition, who's voiced any sort of opposition to the July 3rd coup that unseated Mohamed Morsi, the president here. That being said, though, you're also seeing at the same time, you are seeing a continuation of the protests. I mean, I know I've been saying this for the last several months. The two things are going simultaneously. You've got two parallel things going on. You've got this nonstop crackdown that's going on, and you've got jail sentences that are being regularly handed out. Every couple of days, a new raft of jail sentences will be handed out to protesters. People who have basically been charged with either belonging to a banned group or protesting without license, or obstructing public movement. So people like this, protesters and things like this, are still being just sort of locked up. But that's not doesn't seem to be deterring them. They seem to have continued. There seems to have been a lull around the 3rd anniversary of January 25th revolution, which was about a month ago now. There seemed to have been a lull after that. The protest activity seemed to have declined a little bit, but it recently, within the last week or two, it seems to have picked up again. And I attribute that largely to a couple of it really looks like the government, the military-installed government here, is desperately sort of stumbling around and doing making a lot of announcements and decisions and that sort of thing that definitely betray a significant degree of I think confusion. I think they don't really know how to get Egypt out of the current limbo that it's in, because it's really, their tourism is at absolutely zero at this point. The fate of the presidential and parliamentary elections is still up in the air. Still, a date hasn't really been set for that. So basically, what you had was, if you remember in the middle of January, there was a constitutional referendum. We might have spoken about that. There was a constitutional referendum that passed they said it was something like 28 or 35% of the electorate voted, or something like that, and it got 98% in favor of this military-backed constitution. But what was interesting about that, it was touted here. It was touted by the pro-army media here. It was touted as a big victory for the military-installed government, for Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who is the defense minister, who's sort of the de facto ruler here, and it was basically seen as a public endorsement of the government's policies against the Brotherhood and against opposition. But what was interesting about it was it actually turned out to be very weak, and they didn't see the sort of turnout that was expected, and you didn't see these sort of millions of people hitting the streets to show their support for the army-backed government. In fact, they tried really hard. I mean, I saw it with right in front of me, because I live downtown. You had these very limited protests in which young people were conspicuously absent. That was something that a lot of people mentioned, is that the youth, the young people were nowhere to be seen on these lines that turned out to vote for the Constitution. And even the demonstrations that were supposed to come out, these pro-army demonstrations that they tried to muster, were all extremely limited in nature. Were all very small, and again, were top heavy with older people. Sort of betraying, the incredible apathy that you have amongst a lot of young people now. So after that initial euphoria that came directly after the coup, all of this pro-army stuff, this El-Sisi mania where everybody was going out, that has very much faded at this point, and you're definitely in a situation now where you've sort of got a stalemate, where the government miscalculated, this army-backed government miscalculated, and never imagined that 8 months after the coup, they would still be feeling such opposition. And it's not only the opposition. It's not only the opposition to the coup. It's not only pro-Morsi people. It's also the government's total inability to improve the economic climate at all. Right. To rein in inflation that's spiraling out of control, to raise minimum wages. That's been promised for years by successive administrations, that they were going to raise the minimum wage. They haven't even been able to do that. So there's widespread. There's definitely the anger on the street is definitely growing, and it now has less to do with the coup maybe, and more to do with the fact that these new military rulers that had promised so much at first have completely failed until now to sort of show anything any sort of improvement on the ground.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Democracies, dictatorships, left, right, and everybody else. You print money, you debase your currency, you turn everybody, rich, poor, and middle class, against you. Because if they can't rely on their dollar to be worth, or whatever their division of their currency is called, to be worth the same thing tomorrow or 2 weeks from now as it's worth today, then you've got a riot on your hands. It's as simple as that. It destroys all savings. It destabilizes all markets. It makes everything horrible for everyone. And so, in a way, that's the silver lining on this. Is, we've talked about how, Adam, when the Muslim Brotherhood was elected to power and came to power, how the entire executive branch of the government basically just sat on their hands and said, yeah, have fun governing without any of us bureaucrats actually carrying out your orders, right down to the police on the beat on the corner. And now they have the power back, and yet they have the power lost. They have the office back, but the power's already gone. And, of course, the people learned 3 years ago, right around now 3 years ago, that actually what they think does matter, and that even a ruthless torturer dictator like Hosni Mubarak can be brought to his knees if they really believe in what they believe in and insist on it. And so it's pretty hard to take that back, to take that away from the people of Egypt. It may be tough going for a long, long time, but they know that they do have at least some power here. Don't we have elections coming up? And how much trouble is this Sisi in if he wants to be the new elected, pseudo-president, more like general?
Right. He just came out today. Apparently, there was a new announcement from the presidency, or by him personally, that he would announce his candidacy within the next couple of days. Now, this has been an on again, off again thing. It's very strange. I think it has to do with intelligence outfits trying to gauge public opinion. I think that's what all of this will he, won't he stuff is about, because it's become quite tiresome, actually, and I think it's actually hurt his mystique. If he had sort of come out decisively early on and said he was running for presidency, that'd be one thing. But we've seen over the course of the last 6 months, it's been this back and forth, these sort of tantalizing hints that he's about to announce his candidacy, and then another military spokesman will sort of deny that really meant anything, and then he'll say something very provocative to a Kuwaiti newspaper, and then the military spokesman will say, "Oh, well, no, it was taken out of context." It's been going back and forth like this for several months now. So this is very, again, I think it has to do with gauging public opinion, and also, I assume that if he does decide to go for it, he has to win, because he does have to give up his position as defense minister, and if he were to, I don't think he would go in unless he was assured of winning, either by popularity or by simply, going back to the Mubarak era and just fixing the polls. But according to the roadmap that was imposed by the military upon Morsi's ouster, you were basically supposed to have a constitutional referendum, which they did, and which I spoke about earlier. I'm not sure if you caught that or not. That was in mid-January, and the next two phases are supposed to be parliamentary and presidential elections. Now, again, there was talk that it was going to be in April, and then that was sort of retracted. Right now, it looks like, and this also goes back to how I was saying earlier, how the government really does seem to be in a state of severe confusion. I think they're sort of caught between, different factors that are different things that are going on around them. They're being pulled by different forces, different internally and domestically and abroad. So the point is, there until now there really is no date has been set for the elections, and these elections are supposed to be pillars of these are supposed to be the pillars on the milestones on this roadmap that prove that Egypt is well into its democratic transition. And you'll hear John Kerry and stuff paying lip service to the roadmap and that sort of thing, but no date has been set, and his candidacy is still uncertain. And in the absence of Islamist candidates, it'll be a pretty boring. It's turning out to be a pretty boring race, because it'll basically be different people, all of whom, at the end of the day, represent the deep state. Which, as you said earlier, it's an important point that people understand that in Morsi's brief time in office, his 1 year in office, he was. I sort of see it as sort of skating along the surface of a frozen lake. That's sort of what he did. He didn't actually get, he didn't penetrate, he didn't get beyond he didn't scratch the surface of the deep state. He made some personnel changes. He tried to, but it's an extremely daunting task. And those of us who sort of look forward to a speedy change to Egyptian state institutions and to Egyptian policy and that sort of thing after the January 25th revolution in 2011. That all seems very, very naive now in retrospect.
Well, so,
do you know what I mean?
Is there going to be a lot of, we can talk more about the persecution of the Muslim Brotherhood supporters too, but just the regular people, aren't they getting, you say the mystique is gone from General Sisi, who saved so many dissenters from the Muslim Brotherhood, apparently, or whatever, last summer, but it seems like, you're saying he's lost his mystique. Pretty soon they're going to start being mad that they don't hold, the people in general are going to, of all factions, they're going to start getting mad if they're not going to hold elections like in the deal, at least parliamentary elections, if, those have to go first, something.
Right.
Or else they're going to have a whole new revolution again, right?
Yeah. Unless they come to some kind of, there are certain things that suggest that there might be communication going on behind the scenes. I can't confirm any of that. It's incredibly difficult to, I don't know what's going on behind closed doors, but there are statements, for example, Nabil Fahmy, who's the foreign minister, said at the American University in Cairo, I think he said yesterday, in a speech in English, he said that the Muslim Brotherhood were members of Egyptian society who enjoyed all of their, who enjoy all of their rights. It's a very contradictory sort of thing. There are things to suggest that maybe there's some kind of it's Brotherhood's position that they won't talk to the government, that they will never talk unless constitutional legitimacy is restored, which means a restoration of, Morsi's reinstatement and a restoration of the early Constitution, I guess.
Which
so
is
they
never going to happen. Or not anytime soon, anyway.
Well, whether or not it happens, that certainly can't be seen by their supporters to be negotiating. So for that reason, they wouldn't be carrying out any kind of direct negotiations. And at the same time, the military can't be seen by its hardcore supporters as negotiating with the Brotherhood after everything that it's done. After turning them into a terrorist, labeling them a terrorist organization, going after their affiliates.
Well, but Adam, the problem with that has always been that there's just way too many of them. If you count all the Muslim Brotherhood, and if you call their group, political party, everyone who would have been a registered Brotherhood voter or whatever, that's a hell of a lot of Brotherhood members and supporters. They can't just, or I guess they could, but it doesn't really make political sense for the dictatorship to clamp down on them all. I mean, as bad as they've already done is for, more than half a year now is one thing. But,
right.
It seems probable that they would start to back off. Again, like you're saying, if the Brotherhood is willing to negotiate with them behind the scenes, they'd be smart. They certainly would be smart to negotiate back. I don't know if they are smart.
Right. Well, one thing's for certain. The Brotherhood is definitely much more adept at being in the opposition, at being the victim of persecution. So it's sort of in its element now. We saw the Brotherhood struggling to govern. And I mean, the one thing there's been a lot of criticism of the Brotherhood over the last year, and I think a lot of it is invalid and was actually just propaganda on the part of their enemies. But one thing is certain, is that they were definitely not prepared at all to take on the task that fell to them when they won the presidency and when they won a big slice of parliament. They were absolutely 100% unprepared to sort of take on the deep state. They might have known of its existence, and they might have known of it, but it's obvious that they couldn't even, like you said, you've got Morsi there, and his own police aren't willing to hit the streets and secure public and maintain public security.
Well, by the way, what's the state of the campaign of violence? There was there have been some bombings. I know in Sinai you sort of exclude that as sort of a separate case, but there were attacks inside Cairo, that kind of thing. Looked like the Muslim Brotherhood or really the government was making the worst of it. But has that died down? I guess I haven't heard about any big bombings lately or anything.
It's not as consistent as it was like last summer when it was daily, when you had attacks daily. However, there are every couple of days, you might have a couple of days in a row where there are certainly attacks on police. I know just yesterday you had at least one police officer was killed, and there were separate attacks. There were like 2 or 3 different attacks, and it left one police officer dead and a handful injured. And again, those were separate attacks. You also had something happened in Taba, in Sinai, about 2 weeks ago. I'm sure you know about that, where a handful of Korean tourists were killed, which was a big deal, which is a really big deal because that was the first attack on tourists. And that, that basically, there wasn't a tourism industry to start with to kill, but that was sort of like another shot, another round, in the prone corpse of Egyptian tourism.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm sorry we got to cut it off here, but thank you very much for joining us again, Adam. I'll be calling on you.
Sure, Scott.
Appreciate it. Everybody, that is Adam Morrow. He lives in Cairo, Egypt. He's a journalist for Interpress Service at ipsnews.net. And this is the Scott Horton Show, and we'll be right back with Ray McGovern in just a sec. On March 7th at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., the Council for the National Interest is co-hosting the first ever national summit to reassess the U.S.-Israel special relationship. Confirmed speakers include Walt, Scheuer, Giraldi, McGovern, Katowski, Porter, McConnell, Weiss, Raimondo, USS Liberty survivor Ernie Gallo, as well as co-sponsors Alison Ware of If Americans Knew and the great Grant Smith of the Institute for Research, Middle East Policy. That's the national summit to reassess the U.S.-Israel special relationship. Friday, March the 7th, all day at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. natsummit.org. Hey, Al Scott Horton here for The Future of Freedom, the monthly journal of the Future Freedom Foundation at fff.org/subscribe. Since 1989, FFF has been pushing an uncompromising moral and economic case for peace, individual liberty, and free markets. Sign up now for The Future Freedom, featuring founder and president Jacob Hornberger, as well as Sheldon Richmond, James Bovard, Anthony Gregory, Wendy McElroy, and many more. It's just $25 a year for the print edition, $15 per year to read it online. That's fff.org/subscribe. And tell them Scott sent you. Hey, I'm Scott Horton here to tell you about this great new book by Michael Swanson, The War State. In The War State, Swanson examines how Presidents Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy both expanded and fought to limit the rise of the new national security state after World War II. If this nation is ever to live up to its creed of liberty and prosperity for everyone, we are going to have to abolish the empire. Know your enemy. Get The War State by Michael Swanson. It's available at your local bookstore or at Amazon.com in Kindle or in paperback. Just click the book in the right margin at scotthorton.org or thewarstate.com.